We're going to get started. We have a really exciting presentation for you guys, and it's really full, so we want to get started and get going. First off, good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Sophie Miller, and I'm the Director of Quality Assurance at CUCS, Center for Urban Community Services. And I'm really delighted and feel very honored to be the person who gets to kick off this workshop. This workshop is about how we implemented collaborative and proactive solutions at CUCS. Collaborative and proactive solutions is an intervention developed by Dr. Ross Greene. So we stumbled upon this intervention. Actually, our Associate Executive Director, Joe DiGenova, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, he discovered this in a Mother Jones article. So for those of you who may be familiar with that publication, there is an article in Mother Jones a couple years back, and the title of the article was, "What if everything you knew about disciplining children was wrong?" And when Joe read it, what he saw was a real overlap with the concept person-centered approaches, what we call person-centered approaches in behavioral health. And he saw that overlap, but that Dr. Greene had found a way to operationalize that person-centeredness and expand upon it in a different way that was really intriguing. So he emailed that article around to a bunch of us, program directors at CUCS, and some other folks like me, Director of Quality Assurance, and he included a question in it about whether or not we thought this intervention could work with adults. Could we adapt this intervention to work with adults? And that led us to a conversation, virtual conversation, in-person conversation, coffee-getting conversations about the intervention. And eventually we invited Dr. Greene to come talk to us in our professional development series. And we had him, I think, 3 times in total, and he came to talk to a bunch of our managers and assistant managers and whatnot. Just to give you a little bit more background on the intervention, so Dr. Ross Greene has developed this intervention over his career course as a child psychologist, working with behaviorally challenging children. And he's published a bunch of books, but I brought one which folks may know about and is in the title of the workshop today, The Explosive Child. This was published in 1998. And since this time, he has implemented this model in numerous different types of settings, including mainstream schools with behaviorally challenging kids, residential settings, psychiatric settings, juvenile detention settings. So it has had the opportunity to try and use this intervention in a bunch of different settings. And it is an evidence-based practice. It is empirically supported. So anyway, after he came and spoke with us, we were kind of hooked. He's a wonderful speaker, and his intervention really spoke to our philosophy and what we were trying to do at CUCS. And so a bunch of programs sort of came forward and said, yeah, we would like to try this at our sites. And we ended up doing a pilot at 3 different sites, a shelter, a supported housing program, and also at our intensive mobile treatment team, which is the team that's here to speak with you guys today. So Amy Gottheimer, Program Director of IMT, Natalie Nokes, and Henry Stemler. Sorry. These are our IMT team folks, and they're going to present to you about how they've used this intervention in their program. And along the way, you're going to get to know a little bit about IMT, which in its own right, it's a new intervention and really cutting edge as well. So before I hand it off to them, I want to do a teensy bit of housekeeping. 2 things. First off, if you end up getting up for a question and answer session, you'll need to come up to this microphone right here in the middle of the room. The session is being videotaped, so we want folks to speak into that microphone. Audio taped, sorry, thanks. And secondly, at 2 points in our workshop today, we're going to break into smaller groups. And we suggest to folks, if possible, that if you can group yourselves with folks from your own agency, with colleagues, it would help those exercises, really help you to get the most out of those exercises. And that's just because you'll know the culture of your agencies, your program models, your sort of operating procedures, so you won't sort of have to spend time giving that kind of context to your other group mates. And you can really focus on learning and understanding the interventions. So that's it for me. And I want to please join me in giving a round of applause to our team here. And I'm going to hand it off to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Hello, everybody. I wanted to start with finding out who knows anything about intensive mobile treatment here. That's great. That's really exciting. Most people don't know anything about us. We're a very new initiative that was it's funded through the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and has been part of the NYC Thrive initiatives that is looking to work with, each team works with 25 individuals who have been found to be unsuccessful in traditional service models. So these are people that have failed out of supported housing, that have not been able to be served by ACT, some of which AOT even says we are not the right type of service to be able to treat them. So with IMT, intensive mobile treatment, what we were able to do was get a lot of freedom and reign to do anything we can to engage and continue to engage this population. And so obviously this population has a lot of difficulties that they are displaying, a lot of difficulties in their interactions with other people, a lot of difficulties in their interactions with authority bodies, and often also have a history of violence, which is another component within it. So we are working with 25 people at a time that have not been able to successfully connect to help in any other capacity. And so far, we've been very successful. This started in 2016. We've maintained an almost entirely consistent caseload during that time. We've only discharged people because of a long-term stay outside of New York City, and have seen a significant decrease in the hospitalizations and ER visits for this population overall, as well as an increased connection to housing and supported housing. And I know I see a couple folks here from supported housing units where we have our participants staying at. So, going with that, I did want to make sure everybody knows about the livesinthebalance.org website. That's Ross Greene's website. The majority of handouts that you have today can also be found on this website in Coming Together. And so we were looking at CPS and what exactly it is and why it makes sense for us. It's based on this belief that people want to do well if they can, and they will if they have the skills for it. That we're seeing these difficulties, we're seeing the explosions, we're seeing all of the behaviors that are making us feel scared or driving us out of our minds when somebody's skills that they have do not meet the demands of the situation that they are presented with. And so CPS is looking to develop those skills, help people feel heard and understood, and end up being able to approach those situations in more capable ways. So the principles are focusing on problem solving rather than correcting the behavior. We want to look upstream of the behaviors that you're seeing because it is coming from a place, and if we can talk about where it's coming from, then we can actually stop not just that problem, but maybe subsequent problems that would be coming with it. And the idea is that we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page, because the person that you're working with, the client, the participant, the tenant, has a whole history and context that they are living within that we can theorize about and probably make really, really spot-on assumptions about, but we can't know for sure unless we're eliciting it from them. It's about collaboration and working together, which is obviously a skill that moves forward so many different situations, and that we want people to be able to demonstrate. We want tenants in housing to be able to demonstrate collaboration with their neighbors, collaboration with the supported housing providers that are there, collaboration with the landlords, collaboration with the maintenance people. And I think the most important thing is that CPS is proactive, that you're moving into situations thoughtfully, coming to an idea of how you want to address the situation, going through the CPS intervention, and then it builds on itself after that, that you're keeping and coming back to it. And the skills that you are demonstrating when doing the CPS intervention are actually the skills that you're modeling for that person and helping to teach that person to use going forward. So the top 5 skills that we want people to learn are empathy, appreciating how one's behavior is affecting others, resolving disagreements in ways that do not cause conflict, wouldn't that be nice, and taking another's perspective, and honesty. So obviously this model was first introduced for children, and Ross Greene's books are mainly around children. It has been demonstrated with adult populations and inpatient settings and incarcerated settings. But why would we want to use CPS with adults? I think having a concrete implementation of rules is something that can create a barrier and more headbutting with the tenants that you're working with the people that you're working with, the participants that we're working with. When we come down very hard with like, this is the way it has to be, we end up getting somebody who wants to push right back up against that limit. So being collaborative and solving a problem together is something that gets us a whole lot further in our relationship and strengthens that bond. That lagging skills are lagging skills regardless of how old someone is. And I know for the IMT participants, we're dealing with people with really significant trauma histories and significant interruptions in childhood and adolescence where they have not been able to learn and develop any of these skills. And I know that these are people that are also living in your buildings too. Our participants have often been in environments where their input wasn't a primary focus. And I'm seeing I wrote the wrong there. But that's getting someone to the point where they're starting to think about their actions and not just like understanding their actions and what their actions are doing and where their emotions are coming from also means that they can have a greater understanding of how they are impacting other people around them. And promoting empathy is great all around. It's our social work watchword. We want to make sure that that happens together. So throughout this presentation, Natalie is going to be taking us on the journey of one of our IMT participants. And I'm going to take it over to you now.
I want to see it. Does this work? Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Okay. All right. So the participant that we're going to be talking about is Jason. At the time when we started working with him, he was a 34-year-old street homeless Jamaican male. He was referred to IMT from an ACT team because they literally couldn't find him regularly enough to work with him. He was moving all over the subway system. He just wasn't able to be found on a regular basis. He'd also been kicked out of multiple transitional residences due to violence, which included property damage at these properties as well as assaults on staff. So he'd sort of run out of options, and that's why he came to IMT. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia very early on in his life, and he continued to suffer from persistent auditory hallucinations throughout through the time that ACT was working with him and all these other services were trying to provide services. And that was exacerbated by pretty constant marijuana use. So the first thing IMT did with Jason was to just try and build up a relationship with him at his pace. And early on, what that looked like was us going into the subways where we thought he might be almost daily, bringing snacks, bringing coffee, bringing water just in case he was there to give us something to work with him on. We were able to find out that he really likes to draw. He was always drawing things in notebooks or on napkins, things like that. He also likes to look through fashion magazines and watch YouTube videos. So those were some of the early ways we were able to bond with him. We started taking him to an art store about once a month to get some new notebooks that he could draw. Some of the difficulties that Jason had were difficulty expressing his thoughts in words, and he would often change his mind. We'd meet with him one day and he'd say he wanted to do this. The next time we saw him, he wouldn't want to do that at all. So it was these drastic changes, and it was difficult for us to figure out what he really wanted to work on with us. So after several months of this, he finally expressed a desire to live indoors again. And that was something that he talked about over and over again, every time we met him, not just one time and then changed his mind. So we figured that was a great thing to start working on. So through some work, we were able to match him to a bed at a safe haven, which he had actually been kicked out of before. So that took some doing, and one of the things that we had to do, or what that he had to do, was agree to take medication to go back into the safe haven. So this was something that he had to work really hard for. He didn't really want to do medication, but was willing to talk about it, and we worked through that. And so he made some sacrifices to get back into the safe haven. And we used CPS to do this. So Jason was able to move into a safe haven, and he lived there for a year without incident, and he's now living in a permanent supported housing site where he hasn't had any incidents. And I think a really big part of how he was able to do this was our use of CPS with him, as well as us introducing it to the staff at both the safe haven and the permanent supportive housing site, so that they could also use CPS with him. And that's been just wonderful for him. He still has some difficulties with communication and motivation that'll probably continue for a while, but through CPS, we were able to figure out ways to get around really immediate things such as fire safety and medications and medical care. We could work out a plan of action with him for that. So Henry is gonna get us started on how we use CPS.
Hello, everybody. All right, so where do we start? In the handouts, you have two Allsups. One is for our case study, and you can kind of see how we did it with Jason. The other one is just a blank one that you guys are going to use in a little bit. The Allsup is the assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problems. And then we go to the second step, which is Plan B, and then the third step is monitoring the process. The worksheet is more of a discussion guide. In our team meetings, we do it together. We start there to really try and figure out what the lagging skills are, and then we go to the unsolved problems on the right side. You want to focus on things you can impact. Focus on realistic unsolved problems and lagging skills. The sheet is pretty self-explanatory, but you start from the top and you go down, you review each lagging skill. As you go down in a group, you're going to start to see things that you might not have in a regular case conference about this person. You want to identify as many difficulties as possible for each skill. I know the boxes are a little small, but you can use on paper. Start with the lagging skill, as I said, and then move on to the unsolved problem. After checking off a lagging skill, you want to start identifying unsolved problems. In our team meetings, it's better to do this as a group. We each work with our participants as a group, and so we can really narrow down what those unsolved problems are, so that when we're talking with the person, we're not trying to do it in that moment. We can really try and figure out on our own and then come to the person and really have a better collaboration that way. When you do bring it to the person, you can ask various questions. What trouble are you having? Are you getting in any trouble here? What are the type of problems you see? Unsolved problems, as you see on the one for Jason, they can go to different lagging skills. And as you start to list these unsolved problems and you start seeing more and more of the same unsolved problem, you'll start to really identify what you should be working on. This isn't the time to hypothesize. You just want to focus on the behaviors that you're observing at this time. And what are the lagging skills? All right, so we have the executive functioning kind of groupings in here, which is the frontal lobe, those mental tasks. You have the language processing, emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, and the social skills. I know for us, our participants, we often have people who not only have a psychiatric diagnosis, but may have an intellectual disability, and a lot of the times, some of the problems we see are related to social skills. Executive functioning. Handling transitions, shifting from one mindset task to another. Handling transitions like going into a supportive housing environment, right? Doing things in a logical sequence or prescribed order. Persisting on challenging or tedious tasks. Poor sense of time. With Jason, as we'll hear, one of the lagging skills we're doing right now is poor sense of time. He has a really poor sense of time. We can't get him to meet on a time ever, and haven't been able to, but we're trying to get there. We still go out, and luckily now that he has a housing placement, it's a lot easier, but we spend sometimes up to an hour trying to find him because he thought the meeting was tomorrow. if anybody has problems maintaining focus, that's an executive functioning skill. Considering the likely outcomes or consequences of actions, being impulsive, that's something a lot of our IMT participants are. Considering a range of solutions to a problem is also executive functioning. Language processing skills, the ability to express concerns or needs through language and also being able to understand those from others. Emotional regulation skills, managing emotional response to frustration so as to think rationally. Chronic irritability or anxiety significantly impede capacity for problem solving or heightened frustration. As we go through this, I can think of a lot of our IMT participants as well who have sort of a chronic irritability, maybe due to coming off of substance use. We have a lot of people who are co-occurring diagnoses. And cognitive flexibility, seeing grays, concrete, literal, black and white, the cognitive distortions, deviating from rules or routine, handling unpredictability, ambiguity, uncertainty, novelty, problem shifting from one idea, plan, or solution, taking into account situational factors that could suggest a need to adjust a plan of action, being inflexible. And then the social skills, we see some of this with our younger IMT participants who also have an intellectual disability. Attending to or accurately interpreting social cues, poor perception of social nuances. With Jason, as you'll see, one of the things that often got him in trouble in the past is he survives by panhandling, and he gets really close to people and he doesn't realize that that's inappropriate. And he's not meaning to do it in any harmful way. It's just that's how he knows to get close to somebody. He also doesn't speak loudly, so he needs to get really close to you. Starting conversations, entering groups, connecting with people, lacking other basic social skills, seeking attention in appropriate ways, appreciating how his or her behavior is affecting others, empathizing with others, appreciating another person's perspective, and appreciating how he or she is coming across and being perceived by others. All right, now using the Allsup. When you use it, you want to actually be able to use the same language you're going to be using with your participants or your residents. You don't want to put in any jargon. You want to kind of split it up. You don't want to clump everything into one unsolved problem. Be as specific as possible. And as you see on the Allsup that Natalie did, you can actually get the examples of how specific you need to be. Identifying the unsolved problems with the participants. I talked about this a little bit ago, but you want to ask them questions. You really want to dig for what they see as the unsolved problem as well. What are people bugging you about? What are you getting in trouble for? Those types of questions.
Right, so you guys have the Allsup that's filled out. This is Jason's Allsup. So you can see on the right-hand side, you can just put little X's in the ones that you think are lagging skills that your person has. And sometimes they may have a lot of these, and that's okay. Eventually you'll have to narrow it down and work on one or two things. But to begin with, it's okay to point out all of the lagging skills they have. So we'll take poor sense of time is the first one that we have checked off for Jason. So we know he has a poor sense of time. This is a lagging skill. Then we're going to move over to the unsolved problem. So what's an unsolved problem based on this poor sense of time? So for Jason, he had difficulty meeting IMT at arranged times on planned visit days. And you can see that we're specific in difficulty meeting IMT. He also has difficulty meeting with Safe Haven staff or residential staff, but that could be because of something totally different. And so if we clump those together and we just say, he's not good at meeting with people, then we may miss out on asking the right questions. And he may only tell us about why he has difficulty with one of those things and not both. So we want it to be really specific. So the next one we have is difficulty maintaining focus. So then we move over again to the unsolved problems. And with this, he has difficulty staying on topic when discussing housing goals with IMT. And this is, again, we get really specific here. He has difficulty staying on topic with lots of things. But the thing that's really creating issues for him right now and is stopping him from moving into housing is this inability to stay on topic, or this difficulty staying on topic when discussing housing goals. So that's what we're going to put in here, and that's what we're going to focus on. And you can go through there's checked off lagging skills, and then there's unsolved problems that we see, and how specific they are. Usually, these lagging skills, like the chronic irritability, this creates a lot of unsolved problems, and you can list several in that box next to the chronic irritability if you want to. The most important thing is that you're getting down the unsolved problems, not that you're checking the correct lagging skills or you're checking all of the lagging skills or anything like that. The big focus is the unsolved problems, because that's how you're going to start to present this information and have this discussion with Jason or your participant. So if you move on to the second page of the Allsup, there's 3 things checked off. You'll notice that in the unsolved problems, the first one on the page and the third one are the same, because we don't know what lagging skill that's based on. We just know that he's having difficulty recognizing when people are uncomfortable, when he's getting too close to them, when he panhandles. We're not trying to make a judgment on what lagging skill that's coming from. Who knows? Maybe he does. But the important part is that it's an unsolved problem that's resulting from some type of lagging skill, and we want to address that with him, because that's something that's getting him in trouble in the environment. So from there, we would normally pick one thing that we're going to start with to move into the next phase, which we'll go into. I think Amy's going to get us started on that.
I know. All right. So before
we're
before we get started into the next phase, I think we can take a pause for a second to answer some questions, and then we want to give you all an opportunity to try the Allsup. We'll be walking around and helping you out as you're going along. This is what Sophie was mentioning in the beginning about maybe finding some buddies or someone that you might have some common individuals with. If you want to work by yourself, that's fine, but it is something that's supposed to be part of a conversation that happens between the providers in someone's life. So before we start that, though, does anybody have any questions about the Allsup? Yeah, can you come to the microphone? Or I can repeat it if you want.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Well, my voice is kind of loud. I was wondering, for tenants who have difficulty, like with insight, how do we help them get so specific with the unsolved the unsolved problems?
Great.
Sometimes it's difficult to make those connections.
So it's with people who have difficulty with insight, how do we help them get specific around the unsolved problems?
Yeah.
Great question. I think a couple of things around that. Part of it is that we as providers are hoping to get specific around the unsolved problem, and it's our specificity in how we phrase it to the person that there is an issue around this area. And then we'll talk about, like, when you have that conversation, if they're saying, well, that's not a problem for me, some ways of potentially addressing it. But I would say that, like, having a lack of insight into their impact on others is in itself a lagging skill, right? So you want to try to really highlight the times when that happens and drill down into asking yourself about it. At the bottom of the Allsup are some examples from home and school, maybe not necessarily appropriate because this Allsup is definitely designed for children, the one from the website. But start asking yourself, when do we see, like, their issue with not having a lot of insight really creating a problem? So let's ask, when do you see their issues with insight creating a problem?
I would say that for some of the tenants that I work with, they wouldn't necessarily connect that they have a poor sense of time, and that's why they're having difficulty making appointments with me or their providers.
Okay.
That connection would take a lot of unpacking and fluffing out.
Yeah.
Some of them wouldn't even identify that they have a poor sense of time. Like, that wouldn't come from them.
Totally okay. We're going to get more into that when we talk about having the conversation and the actual, like, intervention of CPS and coming up next. But that would be something on the Allsup that you would say, like, cannot meet with providers at scheduled times. And you want to write, like, split, don't clump. Say, like, wasn't able to meet with me for the past 4 Thursdays in a row when we've had scheduled times and reminders. Right? That can be your unsolved problem.
Yeah, I think the insight piece will really come in the Plan B. when you do this over and over again, part of the indirect benefit is that they'll gain insight into their own behaviors and the why that's happening.
Yeah.
I work with the supportive housing program that works a lot under the housing first model. So when we house it, it's not so much they can be housed, it's house them and then
Deal with it.
their challenges. So I have a particular high-risk housing program where a lot of the clients that are taken in are chronically homeless. They've been in the shelter system or on the street for a very long time. And my question is, the issues that we have with clients a lot of the time is they take their feelings and displace it onto another. So if I'm talking to them about the fact that they haven't paid their rent, they'll give me 75 reasons why it's our fault that they can't pay rent, and it's this person's fault and that person's fault, and if only they had this, and if only they had that. And they'll have all these services, and despite the fact that I'm offering it and we're here for them and we're working on the problems, they refuse to let us bring forth an issue and then have to deal with it. It's always, well, you need to get me this, and then once you get this, I'll be fine. They're not letting us introduce any other methods but their absolute beliefs. They're kind of blocking us from that. And under Housing First, there's no consequences. They don't need to pay rent to stay housed. They don't need to pay their utilities, because if they get in arrears, we're required to pay them. So I don't know how to, I want to be able to use this model, but the clients that we have don't seem to be able to make a connection because they're not held responsible for any behavior.
Yeah.
I think one of the keys is that people will do good if people want to do good. And when hearing you talk, I think one of the benefits of the Plan B discussions that I've found is it kind of changes the language and it changes how you work with someone. And you also get to bring in your other concerns. And I think pulling back the curtain and really saying how it affects you and your program when they're not paying rent really brings them in a different way. And I'm not saying the first conversation they're going to come down and bring money, but overall, when you keep doing that, they're going to feel more a part of it. And the hope and what we've seen with our participants is then they start becoming empathetic towards you because you've been doing it in an empathetic way. It's a longer process, and it doesn't happen overnight.
And also, just to add to that, it sounds like at this point, I know that it sounds like there's all these problems. They're not paying rent. They're not paying their utilities. They're leaving or coming whenever they want. All this stuff that is overwhelming for you, and for everybody that works in that environment. But right now, it sounds like the unsolved problem there is that they're not able to talk about it. And so the conversation can start with, you're having difficulty talking about these things, and you can move from there. You don't have to, that can be the problem that you start solving first, and then the other things kind of fall into place once they're able to talk about it. And that's an okay way to use Plan B. It's a great way to use CPS, actually.
Other questions?
On already? Is it working?
I'm happy to
Yeah.
Just with regard to completing this form, you're identifying the lagging skills. I'm assuming staff are identifying that, or is this in collaboration with the client? And then the problem, the other
That's-
side,
yeah.
is that done with the client's input, or is this a clinical observation in a form that my staff would be completing, and then you're discussing it with the clients?
So the Allsup is intended to be done specifically by providers without the participant or client or tenant there. That it's your opportunity to not just identify what the lagging skills are, but also, right, like get a whole bunch of brilliant people in a room together to put their brain power to use around what are the problems that we're seeing with this person, and also maybe change perspective of that. I know one thing that's happened for us a lot when we were doing this, we would have some problem that someone was demonstrating that was making us want to pull our hair out, and we sit down in the room and we're looking through it and we're checking off every single box. But when we have to actually go into say, like, well, what actually is the difficulty that we're seeing there? What's upstream from that? How do we move behind the behavior and really talk about what's underneath it? It's helped us in changing, like, a reset in our focus and an ability to coordinate with people differently. Is that helpful? Do I see more hands? Sure.
My question is very similar, but I was also interested in these observations must evolve over time. Do you find that the assessment does kind of progress and change, or maybe change directions at times?
Absolutely. I think, right, especially the longer that you do this with somebody, the more you're seeing them able to attain new skills, and then different lagging skills come to the forefront, right? You guys want
Yeah,
to say any more?
I think especially with the participants we've identified some significant trauma, so they're really guarded with us in the first phase of treatment anyway. And so it's hard to really get to know them, and it takes sometimes 3, 6, 9 months. For Jason, 9 months to a year to really even got to know them, to really understand the issues. But during that time, we did use something we call emergency plan Bs, but we'll get to the language of CPS to kind of move forward on some things.
In general, and I would just like to say, I think having the Allsup as a tool that your staff are looking at and reviewing, in the context of having skills being what you're trying to focus your work on with your clients, is something that I think is like the greatest value of the Allsup there. It's a great orientation to how do we want to approach someone. So that being said, why don't we all try to work on the Allsups? Find your groups, find your buddies, pick someone that you're having some difficulties with. We're gonna do this for about 10 minutes. Natalie, Henry, and I are going to be walking around. Sophie's going to be walking around. We're happy to help out around this. We'd love to hear more about you. If you don't have anyone in mind to work on, feel free to use the Jason example. I'm so sorry, Sophie. How was what?
Hello? The next room is complaining about our noise level, and I know that's unfortunate, but if we can just lower our voices a little bit. Can you do it?
Sophie, you want to
Sorry?
calm down a little?
Huh?
Say it again. Hello, folks. 1 second. Sorry to interrupt. There's been a complaint that we're a little bit too noisy in here. The room next door is having trouble hearing themselves. I know it's hard. We're in small groups, but if you can just try and talk a little bit more quietly, and sorry about that. Carry on. Just get right into the microphone. Okay, everybody, can we come back together? I'm sorry to cut us off short. I want us to make sure that we get through the next steps and the actual conversation that you're going to be having with your clients. But I would love to hear if anybody wants to come up with an example of an unsolved problem. I'd love to hear it. Anybody? How was it? Oh, yes, thank you. Do you want to use the? No. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
No. All right. So number.
I can hear you.
I swear I haven't turned it on.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Oh.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, my name is Crystal. I'm also from CUCS. My tenant is a hoarder. So hoarding is a major issue. It goes against the tenant's lease. It's spilling into the community, into the neighbors,
constant complaints because the tenant is a hoarder. Not only is he a hoarder, but he has 2 emotional pets. And he lets them use the bathroom in the apartment. The tenants are complaining, his neighbors, so it's really, really bad. He's had an altercation with his neighbor because the neighbor threatened to kill his dog, so he beat the guy up. He went to jail. So he has an eviction. He has a date to terminate. He has to leave the building. But we've been trying to schedule a deep cleaning for 3 months. He hasn't been able to prep his apartment to even prepare for the deep cleaning. Not to mention he's had deep cleanings. So
Really into the mic.
he has about all of these lagging skills. But the main ones I want to focus on is just difficulty doing things in a logical sequence. Difficulty persisting on challenging or tedious tasks, and difficulty maintaining focus because he's a heroin, he uses heroin, he's selling drugs, using drugs, he's just doesn't care. He doesn't even care for his pets anymore.
Yeah.
He has no motivation to do anything.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Crystal. I think, right, like some of the unsolved problems that could come out of that are that the last time we were scheduling for the deep cleaning, it seemed like you had difficulty preparing your apartment to receive the deep cleaning. What's up? We're going to get to the what's up in right now, but thank you so much for sharing that with us, Crystal. Okay. So now that we've completed an Allsup, what are going to be the next steps? Per Ross Greene, we have 3 different ways that we can move forward. We can go with Plan A, which is solving the problem unilaterally. Plan B, solving the problem collaboratively. Or Plan C, setting the problem aside for now. I think the Allsup is a fantastic tool. I highly recommend continuing to use the Allsup in what's happening. I know that for us, we have found that having Plan B conversations is really, really, really great when you can. We can't always have all of the things that lead up to a Plan B, the full Allsup conversation prior to when we really need to implement a Plan B conversation. So, right, Plan B is the one that we're going to be going with here. And that's okay. If you have those lagging skills in your head, if that is the foundation of what you're working for and what you're looking at when you're seeing problematic behaviors, then you are more capable of moving into the kind of conversation that's going to move you forward. Ross calls that also emergency Plan B when you're doing it in the moment. But before we get to Plan B, so Plan A, solve the problem unilaterally. That means that we decide what the solution is. It's not a partnership. It's often going to create more challenges and in general is uninformed of the context and reality that your client is living within. Plan C, we also don't want to do, right? Like that's setting the problem aside for now. You want to be able to come back to the problem. Sometimes that is the appropriate thing to do. Sometimes you cannot address that problem right within the moment. It's about prioritizing, not capitulating. You're going to come back later. But what we really want to do is solve the problem collaboratively, which is called the Plan B. It's a 3-step process. There's the empathy step, where you're gathering the concerns of your client, your participant, then defining your concerns, talking about your side and why it's important to them. And then the invitation step, where you are inviting that other person to come together with you to create a solution that is realistic and mutually satisfactory. So the empathy step. The goal is to gather information so you both have the clearest possible understanding of their perspective and concern. You're going to start with what you've written in on the Allsup. You've identified your lagging skill, and then you've written the difficulty next to it. It's difficulty with preparing your apartment for a cleaning. It's difficulty with meeting IMT staff for for the scheduled meetings for your appointments. And then you end it with, what's up? Because you want to get from that person, what is up? So what happens next? Your client's going to say something, they're going to say nothing, they're going to say that there isn't a problem, They're going to say that they don't want to talk, or they're going to get defensive in some other kind of capacity. Let's say that the participant says something. Great! Then you are going to be drilling down to understand their perspective more and more and more. And in your handouts, there's the drilling cheat sheet. This is also available on livesinthebalance.org. But these, right, like these are skills that I think that we in this stratosphere, in this area of social service, are highly, highly adept in. Those active listening skills and engagement skills, the reflective listening, the clarifying statements, the who, what, when, and where, the conditions where things happen and where they don't happen, the discrepancies that you're observing, what that person feels like is pushing the problem, and breaking the problem down into its components. This is not the time to start focusing on solutions, and it's super easy to go to like, well, I know a great way for us to fix that right in that moment. Not the time. This is purely information gathering, purely making sure that that other person is being heard to the fullest extent possible. We want to stay neutral and non-defensive because this is not about us. We want to make sure that we're not rushing through, and obviously in those moments we can get people that want to put everything under the sun. So maybe the empathy step takes more than one meeting with a person, and that's okay. And this step ends when we've summarized, then the participant agrees that there isn't anything else to add. So what if they say nothing, or I don't know? Maybe they've never thought about it before. Maybe nobody has ever asked them for their perspective on things before. Maybe it's been a long time since they've ever thought about their own concerns, or they need time to think, or they struggle to put their thoughts into words. So we keep drilling. And to ourselves, we want to ask, is this something, like, did we frame this in a specific enough way? Was this clear enough? Or did we accidentally use plan A and say, give them the solution that we had already identified for them, right? And in general, get comfortable with silence. If they become defensive when you're laying out the problem, that they're saying it's not a problem, there's likely plenty of conflict that go on around the problem. Even if it's just getting hassled by you because there is a problem, that's still something that they probably want to change. And also eliciting from them what they feel is the problem. They say, I don't want to talk. There's probably a good reason. We can use, right, I remember in my field practice class a million years ago, my favorite teacher was saying, right, somebody asked me a question about myself, I always turn it around and say like, okay, I don't know if I can answer that right now, but let's find out why you want to know. We can do that the same thing here. I assume there's a great reason that you don't want to talk. Can we talk about where that's coming from? Can we talk about, if you could talk, what would you say? Why would you, like, what's keeping you from being able to share that right now? What's the barrier to it? Or you can table it, you can come back to it another day. They say that I don't have to talk to you. They're probably waiting for you to unilaterally give them the solution to their problem that they have to solve. And so we want to make sure that we're reassuring them that this is something different that we're trying to do, that this is a new way that we want to be interacting with each other to make sure that their needs are met, that our needs are met, and that we all move forward together, and that they're not in trouble. So, let's go back to Natalie.
All right, so, I gotta get close to this thing, don't I? All right, so if you guys remember, our case study is Jason. So the plan B I'm gonna take you guys through is actually was on the morning of the day for his scheduled move-in to the safe haven. So running up to this, he's gotten on meds. He said he wants to do it. He's gotten himself to the safe haven on the day of intake. So this has been a lot of work that's gone into this. So we get there, signs in, he does great. And then security tells him that he needs to empty his pockets before he can go in. Everything stops. He backs out, his demeanor totally changes, and he leaves. He says, I'm not doing this, I'm leaving. So I followed him out and learned that he had some marijuana in his pocket, and he didn't want to take it out. So I'm like, we've done a year of work getting here, like just throw the weed away. Or I like start giving him all these things that he could do with it, stash it, I'm just trying to come up with solutions. So in this moment, I'm doing plan A, and it totally failed. It didn't get us anywhere. He literally walked away from me and said, I'm not doing this, I'm done. So luckily, we had learned to do CPS, so I figured this would be a good time to use it because clearly I was not understanding where he was coming from on this. So, as in most of our situations, there were constraints here because this was his scheduled move-in day. So I had to ask the safe haven, like, hey, what are you guys okay with here? So they told me that they would hold his bed for the remainder of the day, but I had to get him moved in by the end of the day. So we had a little wiggle room there. And that's something that's going to happen with every one of these Plan Bs in supportive housing. There's going to be restrictions that you have to keep in mind because you can't promise that those will go away. That has to come into your Plan B. So after that, I went and found Jason, who was really mad at me. But we were able to talk it through. I told him that I wanted to try a new thing. I wasn't going to force him to do anything, but I wanted to talk to him about it. And he was pretty open to that. So using the Plan B strategy, I told him that it seemed like he was having a lot of trouble going into this intake at the safe haven. And I asked him, what's up? So at first it started with him saying, I don't want to go. I just don't want to go. I don't want to do it. And I'm asking, well, why don't you want to go in? What might change your mind? Things like that. This happened for a little while, and that's okay. His guards were up. He was defensive still because I had tried to give him all these solutions that he didn't want. So, and he also has some trouble with words. So I tried to use questions that would evoke responses, but without giving him answers, because that's also using Plan A, saying, well, wouldn't you want to do this? Things like that. And that's something that's easy to fall into. So we talked about how did it feel for him to walk into the safe haven? What did he think might happen if he hadn't left? What was going through his mind at those times? So through this, Jason was able to express that he didn't want to lose his marijuana and he didn't want to get in trouble. Those were really the two things that were pressing on him, which I would not have guessed were what was going on with him. So first, I chose to start digging into why he was so fearful about losing his marijuana. So I asked things about what would be so bad about losing that. What does it mean for you to lose that? How does it make you feel to have it? And he was able to come up with the fact that he had paid for it. He didn't have a lot of money, so he didn't want to throw that money away. And he didn't trust anyone to hold it. And he was feeling really nervous at that moment, and he kind of wanted to smoke it because that might bring him down a little bit. So the other thing he had brought up was that he didn't want to get in trouble. So we were able to dig into why would you get in trouble? How would that look? Who's going to get you in trouble? And he was able to come up with, there had been a lot of people there, which there were. There were outreach workers, there was me, there was safe haven staff, there was security. And he was embarrassed. He didn't want to have to pull out this joint in front of all these people who he was going to be living with for the foreseeable future. So he didn't want to have to go through that and have them immediately think that he was this marijuana smoker who shouldn't live there. So there was a lot of self-doubt going on there. So through that conversation, we were able to really define what his concerns were or figure out what they were. So from there, that was the empathy step. So we sort of ended there. We were able to figure out what was going on in his mind. So next step.
So, empathy steps completed, you've summarized, they agree that those are all of their concerns that are happening. We move on to defining your concerns. The goal here is to give information on your perspective, and this is likely going to fall into one of two categories: how the problem is affecting your participant or client or tenant, and how that problem is affecting everyone else around the participant, client, and tenant. This still isn't the time for solutions. These are things that you want to try to relate back to how that person is doing, right? Because as Natalie is going to show you right now, how we did our defining our concern step with Jason, the more that you can make it about them and their happiness and healthiness and achieving the goals that they are trying to do, the more likely they're going to be able to move through that. So.
All right, so Jason's come up with the fact that he doesn't want to lose his marijuana and he doesn't want to get in trouble. So the first thing I do is validate those concerns. Those are real concerns. He has spent money on this. He is in a position where he could get in trouble or be embarrassed. So I told him that it was important to me too that we work out a plan where he didn't lose his marijuana and he didn't get in trouble. And moving forward through the next step of this, we were going to come up with a solution where neither one of those things happened because that was what was important to him. He was really willing to talk about it after that. So I also reiterated to him that it had been very important prior to today for him to move into the safe haven. This is something he'd been working towards. So I brought up that was kind of his concern too. Maybe not in this moment, but that's something that he had cared about, and that's something that I was concerned about, is that he would continue being street homeless. So I asked him if there was a way where we could work together where the two things he was worried about would be taken care of, but we could also address the concern of him being homeless and not moving into the safe haven that he'd been working so hard towards. So at that point, I asked him if there's a way that he saw. Do you think there's a way, Jason, that we can move into the safe haven today and do the intake while still keeping in mind the things that he had disclosed during that empathy stage? So his first response was, let's just try another day. But we know that we had the constraints from the safe haven, so I told him that would be great, but there's coming from the safe haven, we have to do this today. They can't hold that bed. So we have to come up with a solution where we get you moved in today, but you don't lose your weed and you don't get in trouble. So he's got it all in front of him several times. You have to go through all the things that you're making sure you're doing every time. So
that brings us to the invitation step. Your concerns are on the table, their perspective is on the table, and you're going to collaborate together to find a solution that is both realistic, this is achievable, this is not shooting for the stars, and also mutually satisfactory. Everybody is going to be as happy as they possibly can at the end of this. You're going to recap the previous two steps. You want to ask the participant, client, or tenant to give their ideas first. You want to demonstrate that you're as committed to having your concerns addressed as you are having the participants' concerns addressed. And that one solution might not cover all of the concerns that you both have. And really come back to this idea, is this something that we can really make work? Is this something that is actually achievable? And is this something that is both solving the problems that we're seeing and is going to make both of us feel good about the solution at the end of it?
all right, so the last step of this. So at this point, I just asked Jason, do you see a way that we can solve this? And he pretty quickly actually came up with a plan where he would just smoke the remainder of his marijuana and then we would go in, which is not something that I ever would have come up with if I was just plan A-ing this. And I doubt any one of us would have come up with this, but that's what he came up with. So at this point, I'm a little concerned that this might affect his ability to do the intake. It seems to take care of all of the other things where he's not going to lose it, and he's not going to get in trouble for having it, but he might be pretty weird during the intake, and that could lead to him being embarrassed or getting in trouble. So I tell him that. I reminded him that sometimes when he smokes marijuana, he gets sleepy. Is he going to be able to make it through the intake? So he recognized that and said that he would just get a cup of coffee and that he could do some drawing, and we would take a walk after he smoked before we went into the intake. He also came up with that he didn't want security there during the intake when he had to answer those questions about his past and all of that stuff that you do during the intake for housing. And that would help him not feel embarrassed or worried about the fact that he had smoked marijuana. So once we figured that out, we were able to implement that. He went off on his own and smoked all of the joint that he had of marijuana. And then we went and got a cup of coffee, we sat and he drew, and we took a walk, and he was able to go and do the intake, and he was perfectly fine, and he moved into the safe haven and stayed there for a year. So that was not a solution that I would have come up with plan A. But because we were able to talk about it and figure it out, he came up with a solution that worked for everybody.
So we were going to break into a second round of groups. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so I want to take a pause for questions about the Plan B conversation, if anybody has any. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for presenting. And I know I see a lot of head nodding the wrong way in this room. So I'm wondering, how do you get staff to stay motivated to be patient and actually following the 2 steps that are important to hearing the client's side of the story and really getting them to come up with their own type of solution? Because I know a lot of I don't want to say jaded, but I'm going to say jaded employees. So how do you really motivate your staff to really take their time with this? Because it does work.
Yeah.
So
So my secret, I also use CPS with my staff, right? Like the principles within this are reasonable for all situations. And I know you guys can laugh at me all you want to. I think, right, like this isn't rocket science. This isn't something totally out of left field, right? All of this, I hope, feels really familiar and reasonable to all of you. I think it's formatting it in a really specific way. I don't know, how do you guys stay motivated to continue through challenging situations?
I think for me, the motivation is actually born out of the fact that it is easy to become kind of jaded, as you said. In this case study, the example that I gave in the beginning, I'm throwing out solutions and I'm so frustrated because this isn't going the way I want. And I could have either stayed frustrated and it wouldn't have happened, or you have to bring it back and take a deep breath and realize that the only way that you're going to move forward through this with somebody is to use this. And when you're using this, you don't get yelled at nearly as much, which is something that I think we probably all deal with, is angry participants who are frustrated as well as us. And so when you do this, you get to have a much nicer and clearer conversation. And I think once you start doing it, it's its own motivation.
Yeah, I think after we've hit our head against the wall so many times, and we just kind of sit back and what aren't we doing? And we're like, all right, we're not doing CPS. Let's try that. And then after succeeding, once, twice, 3 times, it becomes something you turn to more often instead of something that you're hesitant to use.
So if you were going to ask Ross Greene about it, he would say you want to pick your hardest client, hardest problem to see the greatest results first. And that demonstration is one way to get staff on board with wanting to do this. We've worked with some people who are under Ross Greene who have also said, go for attainable first. Go for a problem that you feel you can impact right in the moment, because you will see huge results, but I think we've definitely seen this be a process that takes time and repetition and getting right back into it, and also needs to have everyone on board. So if you have a smaller problem that you might be able to really get in there and solve fairly quickly by doing CPS and then bring back that success to build off of, I think that's a great way to go about it too. Other questions about Plan B before we move on a little bit? Seems very reasonable, accessible, great.
Just an observation, it does seem to maybe borrow or jive with some of the concepts of motivational interviewing. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Reflective
absolutely.
listening.
The skills that you develop in motivational interviewing, totally applicable here too, right? There's a lot of meld between them from my perspective too. Okay, so we're not going to break into groups again, but we're happy to talk later about what that Plan B conversation looks like in more depth. I'm going to turn over to Henry.
All right, so now you're at the monitoring part of the program with your participant. You want to monitor this with them, see how the Plan B is going, whether it's weekly meetings or once a month, and you're going to fine-tune this as you go. You're going to maybe adjust the Plan B a little bit with somebody. Was it Crystal? Crystal, with your person, if the plan became that you're going to meet on Tuesday mornings and prep for an hour with that person and only do as much as they want to do, and then Tuesday mornings turns out there's doctor's appointments or they couldn't go an hour, you might adjust that a little bit, and maybe you adjust it to where we're just going to meet on Tuesdays and talk about what prep would look like. Sometimes we might do a Plan B and the person might be thinking they can do a lot more than they actually could, especially with somebody who might have hoarding. A lot of emotions are sometimes built up in that. The Plan B process is indirectly teaching the lagging skills. During this whole process, while you're sitting there with them, you're teaching them how to solve problems, right? You're sitting down together, you guys are listening to each other, using reflective listening. These are things that they can go out into the community and model. Keep in mind, when the behaviors are pervasive, pick one scenario and start there. And Amy just basically said that, and Ross Greene said hardest problem first, and we've learned maybe do something more attainable. In some of my experiences, sometimes if you do attack the hardest thing first, you might get all those other little ones, because that unsolved problem might be part of some other things there. All right, what we've learned. The usefulness of the empathy step. I mean, that's in all of our work, right? Really, a lot of our participants are coming out of jails, homeless shelters, Plan A all over that. And when they actually get to sit down and somebody asks them, how do you think we can solve this? You get some remarkable answers, and you really start to build that relationship. The emergency plan B is something we use very often. It's maybe you haven't done an Allsup with somebody and you're in a crisis right now. I was in a crisis the other day with a woman who is street homeless, and we took her to shelter and spent 6 hours with her one day. We left, she left. We took her to the shelter again, spent 8 hours with her one day. Hour after we left, she left. We did it again, and then this time I was sitting with her at a McDonald's and she was in crisis. There's really a lot of things going on, not a good situation. And I just turned to the Plan B language, and it turns out that that really unlocks some things for me. She doesn't feel like she was being treated okay at this one particular shelter that we kept taking her back to, and the staff weren't nice to her. And in the thing, you're like, well, isn't that, you're on the street and you're being attacked and all these things. I wasn't thinking about her relationship with the staff there at all. And this really brought it in, and now we're able to work on that. Other issues trump using CPS. If somebody is having active symptoms of psychosis, somebody is intoxicated, might not be the best time to decide to sit down and collaborate together. Our integration into the program, we used it, there was a lot of hesitancy on us, I won't lie, about using it. But now that we've seen the successes and over again, we use emergency plan B probably once a week, and we're really starting to do the Allsups with all of our participants.
I'd also add with that, I think one of the things that made it very successful for us was that we were integrating the CPS model throughout our entire program. So IMT obviously is small, but we were seeing where they were specializing one or two staff in other programs in the pilot study to try to conduct these CPS meetings. And if it isn't something that's throughout the entire program, that everybody's not ready and prepared to be acting within the CPS guidelines, it's harder to really implement long-lasting change. And it's harder to really implement a plan B if you're not going to be the same person around that, around that client, around that participant, on and on and on and on. So the more people that you can have invested in your sites around CPS, the more likely that it will work.
Right. And it's important to not focus on the behavior, but what's upstream, really going past the behavior, really trying to go past that with the participant to find out what's behind it. Like I said, with the woman I just brought up, the staff not treating her well at this one shelter. Okay, now we can find a different shelter. Maybe we need to work on the relationship with that staff. That's where you really get the wins. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Anybody has any questions, we'll stay up here for a couple of minutes. We're happy to talk about intensive mobile treatment as well. Good job, Sophie. Thank you for doing this with us. Hey. Hi. Uh-huh. Back into what system? Oh, yeah.